Breaking news tonight. President Donald Trump has launched a political thunderstorm with a fiery address targeting Venezuela. Standing in the East Room of the White House, flanked by generals and advisors, Trump declared that Nicolás Maduro's regime poses a clear and present danger to the Western Hemisphere. His words were sharp, his tone relentless. We will not allow a narco-dictatorship to poison our region, destabilize our allies, and threaten our borders. The days of corruption in Caracas are numbered. The speech lasted less than 20 minutes, but its impact reverberated instantly across the globe. Trump promised sweeping new sanctions on Venezuela's oil industry and hinted, without confirming, that U.S. naval forces already moving through the Caribbean were prepared for all scenarios. At one point he paused, looked directly into the cameras, and said, "The Venezuelan people will be free, whether Maduro likes it or not." News outlets interrupted regular programming, flashing banners reading, "Trump threatens Maduro" and "Is intervention coming?" Analysts scrambled to interpret the meaning of his words. Was this merely saber-rattling, or the prelude to an actual U.S.-led operation? On Wall Street, oil prices spiked within minutes. In Miami, Venezuelan exiles poured into the streets, waving both American and Venezuelan flags, cheering what they saw as the beginning of liberation. But, for many, Trump's words carried darker undertones. Critics warned that his vague references to all scenarios suggested preparations for military action, a move that could ignite a regional war. Members of Congress rushed to cable news studios, some praising Trump's boldness, others warning that he was dragging America into another endless conflict. Tonight, America and the world are left with urgent questions. Is Trump bluffing? Is the United States truly preparing to topple Nicolás Maduro? Within hours of Trump's speech, Venezuelan state television broadcast Nicolás Maduro standing on the balcony of Miraflores Palace, draped in a sash of national colors and surrounded by military officers. His voice thundered across Caracas as he declared, "Donald Trump believes he can dictate the destiny of Venezuela. But Venezuela is not for sale, not for invasion, and not for surrender. We are a free people, and we will defend our republic with our lives if necessary." The crowd below erupted into chants of "Patria o muerte," homeland or death. Maduro raised his fist, proclaiming that every citizen must prepare for resistance. If the empire dares to set foot on Venezuelan soil, they will face not an army, but a nation armed and ready. Workers, students, mothers, and soldiers, we will all become defenders of Venezuela. His rhetoric was fiery, but it was also tactical. Maduro framed Trump's threats as proof that Washington wanted to steal Venezuela's vast oil reserves. "This is not about democracy," he shouted. "This is about petroleum, gold, and power. The United States wants to plunder our resources just as they have done to other nations. But here, they will fail." Across Venezuelan state media, images of soldiers training with rifles, tanks rolling through city streets, and civilians in militia uniforms filled the airwaves. Government spokesmen announced a mass mobilization of 2 million civilian defenders, a move critics dismissed as propaganda, but which sent a clear message of defiance. Internationally, Maduro's words echoed through sympathetic capitals. From Havana to Moscow, statements of solidarity poured in, accusing Trump of imperial aggression. In Caracas, fireworks lit up the night sky as government loyalists celebrated Maduro's speech as a rallying cry. Yet beneath the defiance, tension simmered. Opposition leaders warned that Maduro was using Trump's threats to consolidate power, silence dissent, and distract from Venezuela's humanitarian collapse. But for now, Maduro had seized the moment, casting himself not as a struggling autocrat, but as the defiant defender of a besieged nation. By September 3rd, satellite images confirmed what many had feared: a surge of U.S. naval power pushing steadily into the Caribbean. Aircraft carriers, destroyers, and submarines were spotted maneuvering near Venezuelan waters, their movements tracked in real time by journalists, bloggers, and intelligence agencies alike. The Pentagon insisted these were routine exercises targeting transnational crime, but no one believed the explanation. To allies of Trump, the message was clear: America was preparing to make good on its threats. To Maduro, it was evidence of invasion. News outlets broadcast dramatic footage of massive warships cutting through the ocean, fighter jets taking off from carrier decks, and convoys of supply vessels trailing behind. The images ignited panic in Caracas, where long lines formed at gas stations and supermarkets. Rumors spread that U.S. Marines could land on Venezuelan beaches within days. In Miami, Venezuelan exiles cheered, waving American flags and shouting, "It's finally happening!" Inside Venezuela, Maduro doubled down. State television showed him visiting military bases, hugging soldiers, and promising that every hill, every street, every barrio will become a fortress. Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino announced that Venezuela's Russian-made missile systems were ready to defend sovereignty. Loudspeakers in Caracas blasted patriotic songs as militias marched through the streets carrying old rifles and makeshift banners. But the spectacle masked deep fear. Civilians whispered that Venezuela's military, plagued by corruption and shortages, was no match for U.S. forces. Opposition leaders warned that a U.S. strike would devastate the population and trigger chaos. Yet others, exhausted by years of poverty and repression, quietly hoped American intervention would end Maduro's rule once and for all. Abroad, allies of the United States watched cautiously. Colombia welcomed the naval presence, calling it a shield for democracy. Brazil offered logistical support, but Europe hesitated, with leaders warning Trump not to cross the line into open war. Russia and China, meanwhile, condemned the buildup as imperialist aggression, vowing to support Venezuela diplomatically and, perhaps, militarily. The Caribbean was no longer calm waters. It had become the stage for a dangerous standoff, where the flicker of one decision could ignite a regional inferno. As the U.S. naval buildup dominated headlines, the streets of Venezuela erupted with voices of division. In Caracas, thousands poured into Bolivar Avenue carrying banners that read "Libertad ahora" and "Intervención ya." They chanted for Trump's promises to become action, demanding the fall of Nicolás Maduro after years of shortages, blackouts, and broken promises. Many waved both Venezuelan and American flags, shouting into cameras that they would welcome U.S. soldiers as liberators. But only a few miles away, a rival march thundered through the capital, this time in defense of Maduro. Supporters dressed in red, waving portraits of Chavez, shouted "Patria o muerte," and vowed to resist any foreign invasion. Mothers carried their children on their shoulders, chanting that their homes would become trenches of revolution. Government-organized militias paraded through the streets with rifles held high, promising to make every block a battlefield if American troops ever landed. The contrast was striking and dangerous. Clashes broke out in cities like Maracaibo and Valencia, where pro- and anti-Maduro demonstrators collided. Rocks, sticks, and even homemade explosives filled the air as police struggled to maintain order. Hospitals reported dozens injured. The protests revealed the deep fracture within Venezuelan society. One side desperate for foreign salvation, the other determined to die for sovereignty. International media amplified the chaos. CNN broadcast images of crying families demanding U.S. help, while Venezuelan state TV showed loyalists saluting Maduro as the defender of the republic. Each narrative fed into the propaganda war already raging between Washington and Caracas. Amid the noise, opposition leaders warned that Maduro was exploiting the crisis to tighten his grip. Reports surfaced of security forces raiding neighborhoods, arresting activists, and shutting down independent radio stations. Yet hope lingered among those marching for change. "We have nothing left to lose," said a young protester in Caracas, holding a homemade American flag. "If the U.S. doesn't act now, we will never be free." The nation had become a powder keg. For every Venezuelan calling Trump a savior, another branded him an invader. And in that volatile split, the fate of the country hung by a thread. As protests raged in Venezuela and U.S. warships closed in on the Caribbean, the international community was thrust into crisis mode. In Brussels, European leaders convened an emergency session, with the German chancellor warning, "Military intervention will only deepen Venezuela's suffering." "We must not allow another Iraq or Libya." France echoed the concern, insisting that diplomacy, not gunboats, was the answer. But despite the strong rhetoric, the European Union quietly admitted it had little leverage to stop Washington if Trump chose the path of force. In Latin America, the divide grew starker. Colombia and Brazil openly backed Trump's pressure campaign, offering ports and logistical support for U.S. forces. Colombia's president declared, "Venezuela's collapse threatens our borders, our economy, and our people." "We stand with America," yet Mexico and Argentina denounced the military buildup, calling it imperialist aggression. Streets in Mexico City filled with protesters chanting, "Yankees go home," while Buenos Aires erupted with demonstrations demanding neutrality. Meanwhile, global powers took sharper positions. Moscow accused the United States of planning a coup and pledged to send military advisors and weapons to Caracas. "Venezuela will not stand alone," declared a Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson, fueling fears of a proxy war. Beijing, too, issued a stark warning, condemning Trump's threats and hinting at economic retaliation. "Any attempt to destabilize Venezuela will be viewed as an attack on international stability," China's state broadcaster announced. At the United Nations, ambassadors clashed in a heated Security Council meeting. The U.S. insisted it was defending democracy and combating narco-trafficking, while Russian and Chinese representatives accused Washington of fabricating excuses to seize oil. The meeting ended in chaos, with no resolution passed. Financial markets mirrored the alarm. Oil prices skyrocketed past $120 a barrel, while airlines reported canceled flights across South America. Humanitarian organizations pleaded for calm, warning that any armed conflict could send millions more Venezuelans fleeing across borders, creating one of the largest refugee crises in history. For the world, Trump's standoff with Maduro had become more than a regional dispute. It was a fault line threatening to shake the entire global order. On the evening of September 4th, President Donald Trump escalated the crisis with his most uncompromising statement yet. Speaking from the Oval Office, surrounded by flags and senior military officials, he delivered a blunt ultimatum to Nicolás Maduro. Step down immediately, restore democracy, or face consequences that will echo for generations. The president's voice was sharp, his words deliberate. The Venezuelan people have suffered long enough. The United States will not stand by while tyranny and narco-trafficking destroy our hemisphere. Time is running out. The address was broadcast worldwide, and the reaction was instant. Markets spiked again as oil traders braced for potential conflict. Cable news networks plastered their screens with flashing banners. Trump issues ultimatum and is intervention imminent? Analysts compared the moment to George H.W. Bush's warning before the Gulf War, describing it as the most direct threat of U.S. military action in decades. Alongside the fiery rhetoric, Trump unveiled a new wave of crippling sanctions. Venezuelan state oil company PDVSA was completely blacklisted, cutting off nearly all remaining international buyers. The sanctions also targeted Maduro's inner circle, freezing assets and banning travel. American warships in the Caribbean were ordered into forward positions, their fighter jets flying visible patrols near Venezuelan airspace. In Miami, Venezuelan exiles celebrated, waving U.S. flags and chanting Libertad. In Caracas, however, fear spread like wildfire. Videos showed families stocking up on food, water, and medicine, while rumors circulated that an invasion could begin within days. Maduro responded with defiance, calling Trump's ultimatum an act of colonial arrogance. Surrounded by soldiers, he declared, "This is not George Bush's Iraq. This is Venezuela, and we will fight on every street, in every barrio, until the empire collapses." State TV replayed his words on loop, even as whispers spread that parts of his own military were wavering under pressure. With both leaders doubling down, the standoff reached a dangerous peak. Trump had drawn a line in the sand. Maduro had vowed never to cross it. The world now braced for the moment when words would no longer be enough, and actions would define history. September 5th dawned with Caracas under a tense, eerie silence. Rumors swirled that U.S. forces could strike at any moment. Schools were closed, shops shuttered, and families huddled inside, glued to televisions for the next announcement. By nightfall, Nicolás Maduro appeared once again on state TV, this time in full military uniform, flanked by generals and soldiers gripping rifles. His voice was defiant, trembling with rage and determination. Donald Trump believes he can frighten Venezuela into submission. He is wrong. If America wants war, then war will come. But it will be a war they will never forget. Maduro declared Caracas a fortress of resistance, promising that every street would become a battlefield. He ordered militias to prepare defensive positions, unveiled what he claimed were new Russian-supplied weapons, and called on citizens to form human shields around government buildings. "We will not kneel before the empire. We will make history as the nation that stood against tyranny and imperialism," he thundered, his words echoing across loudspeakers in every barrio. Crowds of loyalists erupted in chants of "Viva Maduro! Patria o muerte!" Fireworks exploded over the capital as state media broadcast dramatic footage of soldiers marching in formation. Yet beyond the spectacle, fear gnawed at ordinary Venezuelans. Many whispered that their battered military could never withstand a U.S. strike. Some fled toward Colombia, while others prayed the standoff would end without bloodshed. In Washington, Trump responded immediately with a late-night post on his platform. "Maduro has chosen defiance. The United States has chosen freedom. The world will soon see the difference." The cryptic message sent shockwaves through global media, igniting speculation that military action was imminent. For now, the world stands on the edge of history. Two leaders, locked in a battle of pride and power, have brought their nations to the brink. Trump, the self-styled liberator; Maduro, the defiant survivor. And somewhere between them lies the fate of a people caught in the storm. As night falls on Venezuela, one question echoes across the globe. Will tomorrow bring peace, or the first shots of a new war.